What happens when a woman builds a masterpiece and a man erases her name? How many hands did it take to build the Queen's Dream, and how many of them were free? Can a building be both a prayer and a declaration of power? History often tells the stories of kings and their castles, emperors and their cities. But women ruled too. They inherited thrones, seized power, and held nations together. And some of them were builders. They did not just commission buildings. They envisioned them, they planned vast projects, oversaw engineering marvels, and reshaped the very landscapes of their kingdoms. Their legacies are written in stone and mortar, in canals that brought water to the desert, and in walls that protected their people. These are their stories. Number 17, what if a pharaoh's greatest legacy was not war, but a temple? A woman ruled Egypt as pharaoh for over 20 years. Her public image was that of a man, complete with a false beard. Her greatest building was not a tomb, but a terraced temple carved into a cliff. After she died, her successor tried to erase her from history, chiseling her image from monuments. Her name was Hatshepsut. She was not supposed to be the main ruler. She was the wife of a pharaoh, Thutmose II. When he died around 1479 BC, his son Thutmose III was just a small child. Hatshepsut became regent, ruling on his behalf, but that was not enough for her. Within a few years, she declared herself pharaoh. This was a radical move. Egypt had a long tradition of male kings. To legitimize her rule, Hatshepsut began one of the most ambitious building programs in Egyptian history. She used architecture as propaganda. Her goal was to show that the gods supported her, that she was a true and powerful pharaoh. She ordered work at the great temple of Karnak, the most important religious site in Egypt. She had 2 massive obelisks of red granite erected there. Each was nearly 100 feet tall and weighed over 300 tons. They were quarried in Aswan, hundreds of miles to the south, floated down the Nile on barges, and raised with incredible precision. Inscriptions on their bases explain they were created to honor the god Amun-Ra and to secure a long life for her. It was a statement of both piety and engineering power, but her masterpiece was her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri. She called it Jaser Jezeru, or the holiest of holies. The location was deliberate. It sat directly across the Nile from Karnak, nestled against towering limestone cliffs. Its design was revolutionary. Instead of a single massive structure, her architect, Senenmut, created a series of 3 ascending terraces connected by long ramps. The terraces were lined with colonnades, giving the temple a feeling of light and openness that was new to Egyptian architecture. The temple was not just a building. It was a storybook in stone. The walls of the colonnades were covered in detailed reliefs. One series told the story of her divine birth, claiming the god Amun was her true father. This was a direct claim to a divine right to rule. Another section depicted her great trading expedition to the land of Punt, a place likely in modern-day Eritrea or Somalia. The carvings show Egyptian ships being loaded with exotic goods, incense, myrrh, ebony, and live animals. The reliefs even show the Egyptians bringing back live myrrh trees, which were then planted on the temple terraces. This was botanical and architectural history combined. The temple was part garden, part gallery, part place of worship. Hatshepsut's rule was long and prosperous. She focused on trade and building, not military conquest. But after her death around 1458 BC, the young man she had co-ruled with, Thutmose III, finally had the throne to himself. About 20 years into his reign, he began a systematic campaign to erase Hatshepsut from the record. Her statues were smashed. Her name was carved out of cartouches. Her images on temple walls were chiseled away and replaced with images of Thutmose III or his father and grandfather. He was rewriting history, attempting to create an unbroken line of male succession. The reasons are still debated. It may have been personal resentment or a political move to prevent another woman from trying to become pharaoh. Ironically, his actions helped preserve parts of her legacy. By walling up her obelisks at Karnak, he protected the inscriptions from the elements for thousands of years. By smashing her statues and burying them in a pit near Deir el-Bahri, he created a time capsule for archaeologists to discover. Hatshepsut built to secure her place in history, and despite the determined effort to remove her, The sheer scale and beauty of her architectural vision made her impossible to forget. Her temple still stands as a unique monument, a testament to a queen who ruled like a king and built for eternity. Number 16, how do you build a road to God? A queen spent a fortune equivalent to millions of dollars on a single project. The project was a 900-mile-long road through the Arabian desert. It included wells, dams, and forts to protect travelers. The road served pilgrims for over 1,000 years and still bears her name. Her name was Zubayda bint Jafar. She was the wife of the famous Abbasid Caliph Harun al-Rashid, the ruler from the tales of the 1001 Nights. She lived in Baghdad in the late 8th and early 9th centuries, a time of immense wealth and cultural flourishing for the Islamic Empire. Zubayda was known for her piety, intelligence, and incredible wealth. She was a powerful figure at court, a patron of poets and scholars. But her most enduring legacy was an act of massive civil engineering. The Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, is a religious duty for all able Muslims. In Zubayda's time, the journey from Iraq to Mecca was perilous. It was a long, hot, and dangerous trek across the desert. The pilgrims often suffered from a lack of water and attacks by bandits. Many died along the way. Zubayda, having made the pilgrimage herself, saw the suffering firsthand. She decided to use her personal fortune to change it. She commissioned the construction of a road, the Darb Zubayda, or Zubayda's Road. This was not just a path cleared in the sand, it was a complete infrastructure project. The route was carefully surveyed and marked. The workers dug wells at regular intervals to provide water. Where wells were not possible, they built cisterns and reservoirs to capture the scarce rainfall. They constructed dams to manage water flow and prevent flash floods from destroying the road. The scale of the project was immense. The road stretched from Kufa, in modern-day Iraq, all the way to Mecca. Along its length, her engineers built way stations or caravanserais where pilgrims could rest in safety. These were fortified structures that provided shelter, water, and security. The road was designed to make the journey as safe and easy as possible. It was an act of charity, but also a demonstration of the power and organizational ability of the Abbasid state, and specifically of the queen herself. Sources from the time describe her direct involvement. She brought in engineers, surveyors, and legions of workers. She spared no expense. One story says that when her accountants complained about the cost, she told them to continue the work even if every strike of a pickaxe cost a gold coin. The total cost is impossible to calculate precisely, but it was astronomical. She was investing in a permanent public good. The Darb Zubayda transformed the Hajj. It opened the pilgrimage to more people, including women, the elderly, and those who were not wealthy enough to hire their own guards and water carriers. It became the main pilgrimage route from the eastern parts of the Islamic world for centuries. The road was so well built that parts of it, including some of the wells and cisterns, are still visible today. Archaeologists have traced its path and excavated the ruins of the way stations. Zubayda's project was not a palace or a tomb for herself. It was a gift to the people. It served a practical and a spiritual purpose. While her husband, Harun al-Rashid, is remembered for his military campaigns and the glittering court of Baghdad, Zubayda is remembered for a line of stones and water that crossed the desert. Her work connected people, saved lives, and facilitated one of the great religious journeys of the world. She showed that a queen's power could be used not just to build monuments to herself, but to build pathways for others. Number 15, could a queen's grief build a masterpiece? Her father's tomb was the first major Mughal structure built entirely of white marble. It was a direct architectural precursor to the Taj Mahal. The woman who commissioned it was an empress so powerful, she issued coins in her own name. She was effectively the ruler of a vast empire. Her name was Nur Jahan. She was the wife of the Mughal Emperor Jahangir, who ruled India in the early 17th century. Nur Jahan was not born into royalty. She was the daughter of a Persian noble who had fled to India, but she was intelligent, beautiful, and politically astute. After marrying the emperor in 1611, her influence grew until she was the de facto ruler. Jahangir was more interested in art and nature, and he trusted her to run the empire. She sat on the council, held her own court, and approved official documents. Nur Jahan was also a major patron of the arts and architecture. She had a refined taste, combining Persian aesthetics with Indian craftsmanship. Her most significant architectural commission was the tomb for her father, Mirza Ghiyas Beg, who had served as the emperor's chief minister. His title was Itimadudala, or Pillar of the State. His tomb, located in Agra on the banks of the Yamuna River, is often called the Baby Taj, because it is seen as a draft for the more famous mausoleum. But it is a masterpiece in its own right. Construction began around 1622. Nur Jahan oversaw the project personally. She chose a design that was a departure from the massive red sandstone tombs of previous Mughal emperors like Humayun and Akbar. The tomb of Itimadudala is small, delicate, and intimate. It is built on a square plan with 4 short minarets at the corners, a feature that would later be used at the Taj Mahal. The most revolutionary aspect was the material. It was the first Mughal building to be constructed primarily of white Makrana marble instead of sandstone. This gave it a luminous quality, but even more innovative was the decoration. The entire exterior is covered in intricate pietra dura, a technique of inlaying semi-precious stones like lapis lazuli, onyx, jasper, and carnelian into the marble to form complex patterns. The designs are not just geometric, as was common. They include realistic depictions of cypress trees, wine flasks, and fruit bowls reflecting Persian influences. The level of craftsmanship was extraordinary. Inside, the central chamber houses the cenotaphs of Nur Jahan's father and mother. The walls are painted with delicate floral and geometric designs, and the light filters through beautifully carved marble screens known as jali. The effect is one of quiet, elegant beauty. The tomb is set within a charbagh, a 4-part Persian-style garden divided by water channels, representing the gardens of paradise. The project was deeply personal for Nur Jahan. It was an expression of her love and respect for her father. But it was also a statement of her own power and taste. By choosing these materials and techniques, she was setting a new standard for Mughal imperial architecture. The white marble, the pietra dura inlay, the graceful proportions, all of these elements were refined and expanded upon by her stepson Shah Jahan when he built the Taj Mahal for his own wife a few years later. Nur Jahan was a formidable political operator, a hunter, a poet, and a designer. After her husband's death, she was placed under house arrest by the new emperor Shah Jahan. She spent the rest of her life in Lahore, where she built her own tomb, a more modest structure of red sandstone. But her legacy as a builder is cemented in the exquisite marble jewel box she created for her father. It was a monument born of grief, but it became a blueprint for one of the world's most famous buildings. Number 14, can you rule from behind a curtain and still reshape a continent? A widowed queen ruled a central Indian kingdom for nearly 30 years. She never led an army into battle, but was praised by her military commanders. She spent her state's treasury not on palaces for herself, but on building and restoring hundreds of temples, wells, roads, and pilgrim rest houses across the entire Indian subcontinent. Her capital city had no grand fortress because she said her people were her only fort. Her name was Ahilyabai Holkar. She was the queen of the Maratha Malwa kingdom, ruling from her capital at Maheshwar from 1767 to 1795. She was not born to rule. She was a village girl who was chosen to marry Khandarao Holkar, the son of the kingdom's founder. Her husband died in battle in 1754, and her father-in-law died 12 years later. At that point, as a widow, she was expected to step aside or, by some customs, to commit sati. Instead, she petitioned the Peshwa, the leader of the Maratha Confederacy, to let her take over the administration of the kingdom. He agreed. What followed was one of the most remarkable reigns in Indian history. Ahilyabai proved to be an exceptional administrator and a visionary builder. She understood that the strength of her kingdom lay not in conquest, but in prosperity and good governance. Her capital, Maheshwar, on the banks of the Narmada River, became a center of literature, music, and art. She sponsored industries leading to the development of the famous Maheshwari saris, a textile tradition that continues today. But her greatest legacy was her building work, and it was not confined to her own kingdom. She used the vast revenues of her state to fund public and religious works all over India, from the Himalayas in the north to the pilgrimage centers of the south. Her philosophy was one of religious duty and public service. She rebuilt some of the most sacred Hindu temples that had been destroyed during centuries of conflict. Most famously, she sponsored the reconstruction of the Kashi Vishwanath Temple in Varanasi, one of the holiest sites for Hindus. In Somnath, Gujarat, she built a new temple near the site of the ancient one that had been repeatedly razed. She contributed to rebuilding shrines at Gaya, Dwarka, and Rameshwaram. Her work touched nearly every major pilgrimage site in the country. Her projects were also practical. She built ghats, which are long flights of steps leading down to a river in dozens of cities, including Maheshwar itself. These were not just for religious bathing, but were crucial civic spaces for washing, collecting water, and social gathering. She funded the construction of dharamshalas, or rest houses for pilgrims, providing free shelter for travelers of all backgrounds. She had roads built and lined them with trees for shade. She dug wells and step wells to provide water for communities and travelers in arid regions. Ahilyabai managed these vast and geographically dispersed projects from Maheshwar. She held a daily public court where anyone, from the poorest farmer to the richest merchant, could bring their grievances to her directly. She was a shrewd judge of character, appointing capable ministers and commanders to manage the state's affairs while she focused on justice and development. She ruled with a moral authority that was recognized across India. Even rival states respected her territory, knowing it was well governed and prosperous. She lived a simple, pious life. She wore plain white clothes and spent little on herself. The state's wealth was for the state and its people. When she died, she left behind a treasury that was fuller than when she inherited it, despite her enormous expenditures on public works. Ahilyabai Holkar was not a builder of grand personal monuments. She was a builder of communities, of infrastructure, of faith, and of a just society. Her work was a physical manifestation of her belief that a ruler's duty is to serve. Number 13, what does it take for a woman to build her own palace in a world of men? A French queen was blamed for decades of religious war. She was an Italian outsider in a hostile court. She spent a fortune on magnificent palaces that were destroyed shortly after her death. She used architecture and lavish festivals to project royal power when the monarchy was on the verge of collapse. Her name was Catherine de' Medici. She was the wife of King Henry II of France, the mother of 3 French kings, and one of the most powerful women of the 16th century. She came to France from Florence in 1533, an orphan from the famous Medici family. For years, she was overshadowed by her husband's powerful mistress, Diane de Poitiers. But after Henry's death in a jousting accident in 1559, Catherine was thrust into the center of power as regent for her young sons. France was tearing itself apart. The wars between Catholics and Protestant Huguenots were brutal and relentless. Catherine's entire political career was a desperate attempt to hold the kingdom together, navigating between powerful factions. In this chaotic environment, she turned to architecture as a tool of statecraft. Building was a way to create an image of stability, power, and cultural sophistication for the Valois dynasty, even as its foundations were crumbling. Her most ambitious project was the Tuileries Palace in Paris. She bought the land, which was formerly occupied by tile-making workshops Tuileries, just west of the Louvre Palace. Starting in 1564, she began construction of a grand palace with extensive gardens. The design by the architect Philibert Delorme incorporated Italian Renaissance ideas of symmetry and order. The gardens were the first of their kind in Paris, laid out in a formal, geometric style with grottos, fountains, and a menagerie. The Tuileries was meant to be a showcase of Valois magnificence, a place for the elaborate court festivals she was famous for orchestrating. Catherine was also deeply involved in the expansion of other royal residences. She commissioned a new wing for the Louvre. She also made significant additions to the Chateau de Chenonceau, the beautiful castle that her husband had given to his mistress. After Henry's death, Catherine forced Diane de Poitiers to exchange Chenonceau for another property. Catherine then built a spectacular two-story gallery on the bridge that spanned the Cher River, creating one of the most iconic features of the chateau. This gallery was intended for grand parties and to display her art collection. Another of her major, though never completed, projects was the Valois Rotunda at the Basilica of Saint Denis, the traditional burial place of French kings. This was planned as a magnificent circular mausoleum for her husband and their family. The design was highly innovative, a large domed chapel meant to rival the works of Michelangelo in her native Italy. Though work was abandoned after her death, the plans reveal the scale of her architectural ambition. Catherine's building projects were enormously expensive. She poured her own vast personal fortune and state funds into them. They were often criticized as extravagant at a time of national crisis, but for Catherine, they were essential. The festivals held in her new palaces and gardens were not just parties, they were political events designed to bring warring nobles together and impress foreign ambassadors. The buildings themselves were meant to be a permanent statement of the endurance and glory of the monarchy she was fighting to preserve. After her death in 1589, her legacy was attacked, the Valois dynasty ended, and the new Bourbon kings had little interest in her projects. The Tuileries Palace was eventually completed and became a principal royal residence, but it was burned down during the Paris Commune in 1871. The Valois Rotunda was demolished. Catherine de' Medici is often remembered as a schemer and a poisoner, a dark figure from a violent time. But her architectural vision was real. She tried to build a more beautiful, orderly France, even as the one she lived in was descending into chaos. Number 12, how does a queen fortify a nation spread across 3 kingdoms? A queen united Denmark, Norway, and Sweden into a single massive empire. She ruled this empire for over 2 decades, but never officially held the title of queen in all 3 lands. She secured her realm not through conquest, but through diplomacy, marriage, alliances, and the strategic construction and control of castles. Her building policy was a chess game played with stone and garrisons. Her name was Margaret, I think, of Denmark. In the late 14th century, she became one of the most powerful and effective rulers in Scandinavian history. She was the daughter of the King of Denmark. She married the King of Norway through a series of brilliant political maneuvers following their deaths, and the death of her own son, she became the recognized ruler of Denmark and Norway. Then she was invited by disgruntled Swedish nobles to intervene in their kingdom. By 1397, she had engineered the Kalmar Union, a personal union of the 3 kingdoms under her rule. Margaret's challenge was to hold this vast and disparate territory together. The nobles in each kingdom were powerful and jealous of their own rights. Her solution was a combination of political skill and a firm grip on the military infrastructure, the castles. She understood that whoever controlled the castles controlled the land. Her building and fortification strategy was methodical. She did not embark on a wave of new grand constructions. Instead, she focused on acquiring, strengthening, and garrisoning existing strategic fortresses. She systematically replaced powerful local lords and Swedish nobles, who controlled castles with men who were loyal directly to her. Many of these new castellans were Danish or German, men who had no local family ties, and whose loyalty was to the crown alone. Throughout her reign, she directed funds towards the modernization of key strongholds. At Kalmar Castle in Sweden, the symbolic birthplace of the Union, she undertook significant upgrades to its defenses. She strengthened the walls of Akershus Fortress in Oslo, Norway, making it a formidable royal administrative center. In Denmark, she made sure that the castles controlling the Øresund, the narrow strait that was the main trade route to the Baltic Sea, were firmly in her hands. Control of this waterway meant control of immense toll revenues, which in turn funded her administration and military. Her approach was one of centralization. Before Margaret, royal power in Scandinavia was often weak, with nobles in their own castles acting as semi-independent rulers. Margaret changed that. She conducted a widespread review of property rights, known as a reduction, reclaiming lands and castles that had been alienated from the crown. This gave her direct control over a network of fortresses across all 3 kingdoms. This was not architecture for show. It was architecture as a tool of governance and control. A well-placed, well-manned castle could dominate a region, enforce tax collection, and serve as a base for royal authority. Her letters and administrative documents show her deep involvement in the details of castle management, from appointing commanders to allocating funds for repairs and supplies. Margaret's reign was a period of internal peace and stability for Scandinavia, a stark contrast to the turmoil that preceded it. She achieved this not by waging war, but by creating a political and military structure that made internal rebellion difficult. The castles were the physical anchors of this structure. She was building a unified state, and the bricks and mortar of that state were the fortresses she controlled. She ruled with a quiet, pragmatic authority, and her architectural policy reflected her personality. It was not about personal glory, but about the long-term security and unity of her sprawling northern empire. Number 11. Can a city be built? From A Conqueror's Dream. A queen ruled a desert city so wealthy it challenged the power of Rome. She expanded her city with grand colonnades, temples, and a new defensive wall. She was a scholar who spoke multiple languages and created a brilliant court. Her building program was part of a bold plan to carve out her own empire from Rome's eastern provinces. Her name was Zenobia. She was the queen of Palmyra, a caravan city in the Syrian desert in the 3rd century AD. Palmyra was a crossroads of civilizations, a place where Roman, Greek, Persian, and local Semitic cultures met. It grew rich from the trade routes that passed through it, connecting the Roman Empire with Persia, India, and China. Zenobia became ruler as regent for her young son after her husband, the king, was assassinated around 267 AD. But she was no mere placeholder. Zenobia was ambitious. The Roman Empire was in a period of crisis, weakened by internal strife and invasions. Zenobia saw an opportunity. She set out to transform Palmyra from a wealthy client state of Rome into the capital of a new Eastern empire. To do this, she needed to project an image of power, permanence, and cultural sophistication. Architecture was central to her strategy. Under her rule, Palmyra experienced a final, brilliant phase of construction. The city was already magnificent, known for its unique funerary towers and the grand Temple of Bel. Zenobia added to this splendor. The Great Colonnade, the city's main thoroughfare, was one of the most impressive streets in the Roman world. While much of it was built before her reign, her era saw significant additions and embellishments. The colonnaded street, running for over a kilometer, was lined with shops and public buildings, a testament to the city's commercial might. She is also credited with strengthening the city's defenses. A new set of defensive walls, known as the Walls of Zenobia, were built to enclose a larger area of the city. These walls were a clear statement of her intent to defend her capital and assert its independence. Building walls was a direct challenge to Roman authority, which preferred its client cities to be open and reliant on Roman legions for defense. Zenobia's court was a center of learning. She attracted philosophers and scholars, including the famous Cassius Longinus. Her building program was not just about military defense or commercial infrastructure. It was about creating a capital worthy of a great empress. She oversaw the construction and renovation of temples, monuments, and public spaces that blended Roman architectural forms with Eastern decorative motifs, creating Palmyra's distinctive artistic style. For a brief time, her plan worked. Her armies conquered Egypt, a major source of grain for Rome, and took control of much of Anatolia and the Levant. Her new empire stretched from modern-day Turkey to Egypt. She declared her son emperor and took the title of Augusta Empress for herself. But her success was short-lived. In 272 AD, the determined Roman Emperor Aurelian marched east. He defeated Zenobia's armies and besieged Palmyra. The city eventually fell. Zenobia was captured and, according to most accounts, was taken to Rome and paraded in Aurelian's triumphal procession. The magnificent city she had worked to build was sacked by Roman soldiers a year later after a second revolt. Zenobia's reign was a brilliant but brief flame. She was a builder of not just stone structures but of an imperial dream. The ruins of Palmyra, standing starkly in the desert, are the remains of that dream. The long colonnaded street, the temples, and the defensive walls are the legacy of a queen who dared to challenge the greatest empire in the world and, for a moment, created a capital that could rival Rome itself. Number 10. How does a warrior queen defend her kingdom? She was one of the first reigning queens in European history. She inherited a kingdom racked by civil war and threats from outside. She spent most of her reign on the move, fighting battles against her ex-husband, rebellious nobles, and her own half-sister. Her architectural legacy is not in palaces, but in the grim, functional beauty of castles fortified and walls strengthened. Her name was Urraca of Leon and Castile. She became queen in 1109, ruling a vast territory in what is now Spain. Her position was precarious from the start. As a woman, her right to rule was constantly challenged. Her father had forced her into a political marriage with Alfonso I of Aragon, a rough warrior king known as the Battler. The marriage was a disaster, and their personal animosity fueled a brutal civil war between their supporters. Urraca's reign was a constant struggle for survival. To hold her kingdom together, she had to control the strategic castles and walled towns. Her work as a builder was driven by military necessity. She was not commissioning art, she was securing power. Throughout her 17-year reign, she was personally involved in the defense and fortification of her realm. Historical chronicles show her directing the defense of cities and ordering the strengthening of fortifications. For example, when her husband Alfonso besieged the city of Leon, Urraca was active in its defense. She commanded loyal troops and understood the importance of holding key strongholds. Her focus was on making existing structures more defensible. This meant strengthening castle walls, adding towers, and ensuring that the garrisons were well supplied and loyal to her. She traveled relentlessly, moving from one castle to another, rallying her supporters and directing military operations. The castles of Castile and Leon were her bases of operation, her administrative centers, and her symbols of royal authority. One of the key centers of her power was the city of Burgos, with its formidable castle. She fought to control it, knowing that it was the key to holding Castile. Similarly, she invested in the defenses of other important towns that were loyal to her, like Sahagún and Palencia. Her building efforts were reactive, often in direct response to a siege or a threat from a rival faction. When a town was damaged in the fighting, she would fund repairs to its walls as soon as she regained control. Her architectural patronage also extended to the church, which was a major political player. She made donations to cathedrals and monasteries, which were not only spiritual centers, but also wealthy landowners, and in some cases, fortified places of refuge. By supporting them, she was shoring up her network of allies. For instance, she had a complex relationship with the powerful Archbishop of Santiago de Compostela, a major pilgrimage site. At times, they were allies, at others, bitter enemies. The control and fortification of the cathedral city itself became a point of conflict. Urraca's story is not about creating new architectural styles. It is about the fundamental role of architecture in medieval warfare and governance. For her, a wall was not a backdrop. It was the difference between keeping her crown and losing it. A well-defended castle was not a home. It was a projection of power that could cow rebellious nobles and deter invaders. She ruled in a brutal, violent world and proved she was as tough as any king. She commanded armies, negotiated treaties, and outmaneuvered her many enemies. She died in 1126, passing on a kingdom that was, against all odds, still intact to her son, Alfonso VII. Her legacy is not in graceful arches or ornate palaces. It is in the thick stone walls and imposing towers of the Spanish castles that she fought so hard to control, maintain, and defend. Number 9. What? If a queen used buildings to atone for sins. A queen ruled France as regent for her son, who would become one of its greatest kings. She was a devout and strong-willed leader who crushed a major noble rebellion. She commissioned some of the most beautiful Gothic cathedrals and abbeys of her time. Her building projects were expressions of piety, power, and a mother's fierce dedication to securing her son's throne. Her name was Blanche of Castile. She was the mother of Louis IX, the future Saint Louis. A Spanish princess, she became Queen of France upon her marriage to Louis Vide. When he died in 1226, he left her as regent for their 12-year-old son. The powerful French barons, resentful of being ruled by a foreign woman, immediately rose up in revolt. Blanche's regency was a trial by fire. She had to be both a clever diplomat and a ruthless military strategist to defeat the rebellious nobles and secure the kingdom for her son. She succeeded, establishing a reputation as one of the most effective rulers of the High Middle Ages. Alongside her political and military struggles, she embarked on an ambitious program of architectural patronage that left a lasting mark on France. Her motivations were complex. She was deeply religious, and her building was a way to give thanks to God and to ensure divine favor for her son's reign. But it was also a political statement. The great Gothic cathedrals were symbols of the kingdom's stability and the king's power, which during the Regency was her power. One of her most significant projects was the Cistercian Abbey of Royaumont, founded by her husband but largely built under her supervision and with her funds after his death. She visited the construction site frequently and took a personal interest in its progress. Royaumont was intended as a mausoleum for her husband and other members of the royal family. It became one of her favorite retreats. The architecture was in the pure, unadorned Cistercian Gothic style, reflecting a life of monastic simplicity, but its scale and quality were royally magnificent. Blanche was also a major patron of the great cathedrals. She donated funds for the construction of Chartres Cathedral after a fire, and her coat of arms, the Golden Castle of Castile, can be seen in some of its famous stained glass windows. She also contributed to the cathedrals of Amiens, Rouen, and Beauvais. Her support was not just financial. As regent, her backing gave these massive, expensive, and decades-long projects the royal authority they needed to proceed. Perhaps her most personal and revealing commission was the north transept of Chartres Cathedral. The stunning stained glass rose window, there was her gift. Below it, the windows depict Old Testament kings, ancestors of Christ. In the central lancet window, St. Anne holds her daughter, the Virgin Mary. Placed directly below, in the heraldic display, is the coat of arms of France, representing her son Louis, and her own arms of Castile. The message was clear. Just as Anne prepared Mary for her sacred role, Blanche, the regent, was preparing Louis for his divine right kingship. It was a visual statement of her own importance in the salvation story of the French monarchy. After Louis IX came of age, Blanche remained his closest advisor. She ruled as regent again when he went on crusade. Her final great act of patronage was the founding of the Abbey of Malbusienne, another Cistercian nunnery, where she was eventually buried. Blanche of Castile was a formidable ruler who used all the tools at her disposal. She used armies to defeat her enemies, diplomacy to make alliances, and architecture to project an image of a stable, pious, and divinely ordained monarchy. The soaring vaults and glowing glass of the cathedrals she helped build were part of her strategy to transform a boy king into a saint and a foreign regent into the respected mother of France. Number 8. How does an empress build a new identity for her empire? An empress came to power in a coup, overthrowing her husband. She was a German princess ruling a vast Russian empire. To legitimize her reign and modernize her country, she embraced a new architectural style. She filled her capital city with grand neoclassical buildings, transforming it into a Venice of the North and a rival to the great capitals of Europe. Her name was Catherine the Great. She ruled Russia from 1762 to 1796. When she seized the throne, Russian court architecture was dominated by the exuberant, ornate, Rococo style favored by her predecessor, Empress Elizabeth. Catherine found it old-fashioned. She wanted to be seen as an enlightened monarch, a ruler guided by reason, order, and classical ideals. Neoclassicism, with its inspiration from ancient Greece and Rome, its clean lines, and its sense of grandeur, was the perfect architectural language for her vision. Her reign marked a dramatic shift in the look of St. Petersburg. She declared, "I detest the Rococo style, all that wriggling and contortion. She brought in architects who shared her taste, including the Frenchman Jean-Baptiste Valin de la Mothe, the Italian Antonio Rinaldi, and the Scotsman Charles Cameron. One of her earliest and most important projects was an addition to the Winter Palace, the Small Hermitage. This was intended as a private retreat from the formalities of the court, a place to house her growing art collection. This collection would eventually become the foundation of the world-famous Hermitage Museum. The small Hermitage was followed by the large Hermitage, built to accommodate even more art. These buildings were in the restrained, elegant neoclassical style, a stark contrast to the Rococo palace they were attached to. Catherine's building projects extended across the city. She commissioned the Marble Palace as a gift for one of her favorites, Grigory Orlov. Designed by Rinaldi, it was one of the first neoclassical buildings in St. Petersburg, notable for its use of over 30 different kinds of marble. She also commissioned the Tauride Palace for another favorite, Grigory Potemkin. This was a vast and magnificent palace set in a huge park, famous for its colossal ballroom and winter garden. She was also a builder of institutions. She founded the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens, the first state-funded educational institution for women in Russia. The building itself, designed by Giacomo Quarenghi, was a masterpiece of Palladian neoclassicism. Its sober and imposing facade reflecting the serious educational purpose within. Quarenghi became one of Catherine's favorite architects, and he also designed the Academy of Sciences and the State Bank, further embedding the neoclassical style as the official look of her enlightened state. Catherine's vision was not limited to individual buildings. She was also an urban planner. She approved a plan for the city that emphasized straight, rational street layouts and uniform classical facades for buildings along major thoroughfares and squares. She had the banks of the Neva River clad in granite embankments, giving the city a monumental, unified appearance. This was a massive undertaking that took decades and literally reshaped the city's waterfront. Through her relentless building program, Catherine the Great remade St. Petersburg in her own image. It was no longer just Peter the Great's window on the West. It was a major European cultural capital, a physical embodiment of the Enlightenment ideals she espoused. The buildings she commissioned were a form of propaganda, projecting an image of Russia as a powerful, modern, and civilized empire, with her as its philosopher queen at the helm. She used stone, marble, and granite to build not just a city, but a new identity for her nation. Number 7. Could a queen's love for gardens change an empire's architecture? A widowed queen became regent for her young son. She was a deeply religious woman from a family of great builders. She commissioned a magnificent palace for herself and laid out some of the most beautiful gardens in her country's history. Her architectural patronage helped create a distinct and elegant style that defined an era. Her name was Eleanor of Aquitaine. Just kidding. Let's get serious. A queen in Mughal India known for her piety and love of gardens helped shape one of the most celebrated architectural periods in world history. Her name was Hamida Banu Begum, and she was the wife of the second Mughal emperor, Humayun, and the mother of the third, Akbar the Great. While her son and her grandson, Shah Jahan, are more famous for their building, Hamida was a crucial link and a patron in her own right. Her greatest commission was a tomb for her husband, a building so grand and innovative it set the stage for the Taj Mahal. After her husband Humayun died in 1556 from a fall down his library stairs, Hamida Banu Begum took on the project of building his mausoleum in Delhi. She was not just a grieving widow, she was an active patron who oversaw the project for years. She chose a Persian architect, Mirak Mirza Ghiyas, to design the tomb, and the result was a building that synthesized Persian and Indian architectural traditions. Humayun's tomb was revolutionary for its time. Completed in 1572, it was the first garden tomb on the Indian subcontinent. The mausoleum itself is set in the center of a huge charbagh, a 4-part Persian paradise garden. This design concept, representing the gardens of heaven described in the Quran, would become a hallmark of Mughal imperial tombs. The scale of the building was also unprecedented. It was the first to use red sandstone and white marble in such a massive and decorative way. The central structure sits on a high, wide terrace with vaulted cells on all sides. It is topped by a huge double dome, another first for India. The outer dome provides an imposing exterior profile, while the inner dome creates a more intimate, proportionate space for the burial chamber below. This engineering feat would also become a key feature of later Mughal architecture. Hamida Banu Begum personally supervised the construction. She camped on the site and managed the finances and logistics of this enormous project. It was a statement of love for her husband, but also a powerful declaration of the permanence and grandeur of the Mughal dynasty, which was still relatively new and consolidating its power in India. The tomb was not just a resting place for a dead emperor, it was a symbol of an empire being born. The influence of Humayun's tomb cannot be overstated. It was the architectural leap that made buildings like the Taj Mahal possible nearly 60 years later. The Shahbag layout, the combination of red sandstone and white marble, the double dome, the use of a high plinth, all these elements were refined and perfected in later Mughal masterpieces. Beyond this single great monument, Hamida Banu Begum's influence was felt through her son Akbar. She was a respected figure at his court, and her deep knowledge of Persian culture and her own family's history of patronage likely influenced his own massive building programs. She was part of a lineage of powerful Mughal women, including Nur Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal, for whom the Taj was built, who were active and influential patrons of architecture. Hamida Banu Begum's story shows that architectural influence is not always about commissioning dozens of buildings. Sometimes it is about having the vision to create one building so perfect and so innovative that it changes the course of architectural history. Her monument to her husband became the foundation stone for an entire imperial style. Number 6. How do you remake a city in your own image? A powerful empress inherited a sprawling empire after a long and difficult war. She had 16 children and was a devoted mother, but also a shrewd and reforming ruler. She transformed her summer palace from a hunting lodge into a spectacular Rococo masterpiece. Her building projects and urban reforms helped turn her capital into a modern imperial city. Her name was Maria Theresa. She was the only female ruler of the Habsburg dominions, ruling from Vienna from 1740 to 1780. She came to the throne under the terms of the Pragmatic Sanction, a legal mechanism designed to allow a female heir. Her claim was immediately challenged by other European powers, sparking the War of the Austrian Succession. She successfully defended her inheritance, and after the war, she embarked on a series of reforms to strengthen her state. Part of this strengthening was a cultural and architectural program designed to enhance the prestige of the Habsburg monarchy and its capital, Vienna. Her most famous architectural legacy is the Schönbrunn Palace. Originally a modest summer residence, Maria Theresa decided to make it the magnificent heart of her imperial court. Starting in the 1740s, she commissioned the court architect Nicolaus Pacassi to remodel and expand the palace in the lavish Rococo style. The transformation was total. The palace was given its distinctive yellow facade. The interiors were redesigned with a breathtaking opulence. Her rooms were decorated with white lacquered paneling and gold leaf trim, crystal chandeliers, and bohemian mirrors. The Hall of Mirrors was designed to rival Versailles. The palace had over 1,400 rooms, including private apartments for her large family and grand state rooms for official functions. Maria Theresa was deeply involved in the design process, paying close attention to every detail, from the color schemes to the furniture. Beyond the palace itself, she created an extraordinary park. She had the Gloriette, a massive triumphal arch built on the hill overlooking the palace to commemorate her victory in the 7 Years' War. She commissioned the construction of elaborate Roman ruins, an obelisk, and grand fountains. She also founded the Tiergarten Schönbrunn in the palace grounds in 1752, which is today the oldest continuously operating zoo in the world. The palace and its grounds became a complete work of art, a symbol of Habsburg power and cultural sophistication. Maria Theresa's influence extended into the city of Vienna itself. She oversaw the expansion of the Hofburg Palace, the main imperial residence in the city. She also supported the construction of major public buildings. She founded the Theresianum, an elite educational academy, and the Theresian Military Academy. These institutions required new, impressive buildings that reflected their importance to her reform agenda. She was also a practical urban planner. She initiated projects to improve sanitation and street paving in Vienna. One of her most significant urban projects was the establishment of the General Hospital Allgemeines Krankenhaus, one of the largest and most modern hospitals in Europe at the time. This was a massive undertaking that combined her concern for public welfare with her desire to create a well-ordered, modern capital. Maria Theresa ruled for 40 years, a period often called the Theresian era. She was a conservative ruler in many ways, but her reforms and her building projects fundamentally modernized the Austrian state and its capital. She used architecture to create a setting for her family and her court that was both grand and intimate. Schönbrunn, in particular, reflects her personality. It is an imperial palace on a grand scale, but it was also a home for her beloved family. She rebuilt her capital not just as a statement of power, but as a place to live, govern, and raise a dynasty. Number 5. Could a earthen wall define a kingdom? A warrior queen in the 16th century ruled a kingdom in what is now Nigeria. She was a brilliant military strategist who never married and led her army in person. She is remembered for expanding her territory and for building massive earthen walls around the cities she conquered. These fortifications became the defining feature of her kingdom for centuries. Her name was Amina, Queen of Zaria. The details of her life are a mix of history and legend, passed down through oral traditions and later written accounts. She is believed to have ruled in the mid-16th century. She was the daughter of a king of Zazau, later Zaria, and from a young age, she honed her military skills. When she became queen, she embarked on a series of military campaigns that lasted for her entire 34-year reign. Amina was not a conqueror who simply looted and moved on. She was a state builder. Her goal was to expand her kingdom and control the lucrative trade routes that crossed the region, connecting the Sahara with the forests of the south. To consolidate her conquests, she developed a unique defensive strategy. After capturing a town or establishing a new camp, she would have her army build a massive defensive wall around it. These were not simple palisades. The walls of Amina, or Ganuar Amina, were immense earthen fortifications. They were constructed from packed mud, a common building material in the region, but on a monumental scale. The walls were often miles long, enclosing entire communities. They were thick at the base and tapered upwards, sometimes reaching heights of over 30 feet. They were further protected by deep ditches or moats dug on the outside. The construction of these walls was a major logistical and engineering feat. It required mobilizing thousands of laborers, likely a combination of her soldiers and local people. The process of building with rammed earth is labor-intensive, involving digging up the soil, mixing it with water to the right consistency, and then packing it in layers to build up the wall. To do this quickly and on such a large scale around a newly conquered city was a demonstration of her organizational power and her army's discipline. These walls served several purposes. Most obviously, they were for defense, protecting the inhabitants and Amina's garrison from attack. But they were also a powerful political symbol. A walled city was a secure city, a center of commerce and royal authority. The walls declared that the territory was now part of Amina's kingdom, under her protection and control. They helped to integrate conquered peoples into her domain and establish a permanent military and administrative presence. The legacy of Amina's walls was enduring. Many of the cities in the Hausaland region of northern Nigeria had extensive earthen walls, and the tradition credits Amina with originating this practice. While many of the walls have since eroded or been built over, their remnants can still be traced in the landscapes of cities like Zaria and Kano. They defined the urban geography of the region for centuries. Queen Amina is remembered as a legendary warrior, a woman who led men into battle and built an empire. But she was also a practical architect and engineer. Her building material was the very earth of the land she conquered. Her structures were not ornate palaces, but functional, imposing fortifications that secured her kingdom and left a visible mark on the land that would last long after her empire was gone. She built with mud, but she built for power and permanence. Number 4, what if the most famous woman in history was also a prolific builder? She was the last pharaoh of Egypt. Her life was a high-stakes political drama of alliances and ambition. She commanded navies and charmed Roman generals. While she is famous for her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, she was also a dedicated ruler who initiated a major building program to restore the glory of her kingdom and her gods. Her name was Cleopatra VII. She ruled from 51 to 30 BC during a time when Egypt was effectively a client state of the rising power of Rome. And Cleopatra's primary goal was to maintain Egypt's independence and, if possible, to restore the power and prestige of the Ptolemaic dynasty. She used diplomacy, wealth, and her personal charisma to achieve this. She also used religion and architecture. Cleopatra presented herself to her Egyptian subjects not as a Greek queen, but as the reincarnation of the goddess Isis. To reinforce this connection, she became a devoted patron of Egyptian temples. Her reign saw a significant amount of construction and restoration work, much of it focused on honoring the traditional gods of Egypt. This was a shrewd political move. By showing herself to be a pious pharaoh dedicated to the old ways, she earned the loyalty of the powerful Egyptian priesthood and the common people. One of her most important projects was at the temple complex of Dendera. Here, on the rear exterior wall of the great temple of Hathor, is a massive relief carving. It depicts Cleopatra and her son by Julius Caesarion making offerings to the gods. Both are shown in the traditional style of Egyptian pharaohs. The inscription identifies them as rulers of Egypt. It is a powerful piece of propaganda in stone, asserting her legitimacy and her son's right to succeed her. She funded this work to cement her family's place in the divine order of Egypt. She was also active in Alexandria, her magnificent capital. The city was a center of Greek learning and culture, and Cleopatra was a patron of its famous library and museum. While little of Ptolemaic Alexandria has survived due to earthquakes and the modern city being built on top of it, ancient writers describe the splendor of the royal quarter, which Cleopatra would have maintained and likely embellished. She also built a temple called the Caesareum to honor Julius Caesar, and later Mark Antony. This was a way of politically integrating these powerful Roman figures into the religious and architectural landscape of her capital. The two famous obelisks, known as Cleopatra's Needles, now in London and New York, originally stood in front of this temple. Further south, she continued work on the Temple of Isis at Philae, a cult center of immense importance. She also commissioned work at other sites, continuing the tradition of Ptolemaic rulers, adding to the great temples along the Nile. Her building program was a conscious effort to link her rule to the 3,000-year history of the pharaohs. While her ancestors had done the same, Cleopatra's efforts were particularly urgent. She was fighting for her kingdom's survival, and the temples were a way to rally her people and declare Egypt's enduring cultural identity in the face of Roman encroachment. Cleopatra was a ruler of two worlds. She was a highly educated Hellenistic Greek queen, fluent in multiple languages. But she was also the pharaoh of Egypt who understood the power of its ancient traditions. Her architectural patronage reflects this dual identity. She built in her Greek capital and also in the style of the ancient pharaohs at the great Egyptian temples. Her buildings were part of her political strategy, a way to project power and legitimacy both to her subjects and to the Romans she sought to influence. While her reign ended in defeat, her work as a builder shows a side of her that is often overlooked, the dedicated ruler working to preserve the culture and independence of her kingdom. Number 3, can a woman build a new capital from nothing? An empress was the only woman to ever rule China in her own right. She seized the throne and founded her own dynasty. To break from the past and establish her own authority, she moved the capital and launched a massive building program. Her most famous project was a colossal cosmic pillar, taller than any other building in her capital, designed to awe her subjects and assert her divine right to rule. Her name was Wu Zichen. She rose from a concubine in the Tang court to become Empress Consort, then Regent, and finally in 690 AD, she declared herself Empress Regnant, founding the Zhou dynasty. This was an unprecedented move in Chinese history. To justify it, she needed to create a new center of power and a new set of symbols for her reign. Her solution was to move the primary capital from Chang'an, modern Xi'an, to Luoyang. While Luoyang had been a capital before, Wu Zetian transformed it into a magnificent imperial city that would be the center of her new dynasty. This was a hugely expensive and ambitious undertaking involving the construction of new palaces, government buildings, and temples. At the heart of her new capital was a complex of buildings known as the Divine Capital. The centerpiece was the Mingtang, or Hall of Light. The Mingtang was a building with deep roots in Chinese cosmology, a ritual hall where the emperor communicated with heaven. Wu Zetian's Mingtang was the grandest ever built. It was a huge multi-storied wooden structure said to be nearly 300 feet tall, with 3 tiers representing heaven, earth, and the seasons. It was a physical representation of her role as the link between the cosmic order and the human world. But next to the Mingtang, she built something even more spectacular, the Tianshu, or celestial pivot. This was a massive octagonal pillar made of bronze and iron. According to historical records, it stood over 100 feet tall. It was inscribed with the names of all her officials and vassal states, and was topped by a sculpture of a dragon and clouds. It was a monument to her power, a declaration that all under heaven submitted to her rule. The construction of such a huge metal structure was a feat of engineering and a drain on the imperial treasury, requiring the melting of vast quantities of copper and iron. And Wu Zetian also used Buddhism to support her rule. She claimed to be a reincarnation of the Maitreya Buddha, a messianic figure who would descend to earth to usher in an era of peace and prosperity. She sponsored the construction of magnificent Buddhist temples and statuary. Her most famous Buddhist project was at the Longmen Grottoes, a series of limestone caves carved with thousands of Buddha images. The central shrine, the Fengxian Temple, features a colossal statue of the Vairocana Buddha. The face of this Buddha, over 50 feet high, is widely believed to have been modeled on the Empress herself. It is a serene, powerful face that gazes down with calm authority. By funding this masterpiece of religious art, Wu Zetian was visually merging her own identity with that of a divine being. Her building projects were designed to overwhelm and impress. They were on a scale that few emperors before her had attempted. They were also deeply connected to her political and religious claims. The new capital, the cosmic halls, the giant pillar, and the divine-looking statues were all part of a carefully constructed image of a new kind of ruler, a female emperor whose power came directly from heaven. Her dynasty did not last. After her death, the Tang dynasty was restored, and some of her more extravagant constructions, like the Mingtang and the Tianshu, were destroyed by her successors, who sought to erase the memory of her usurpation. But the sheer scale of her vision and surviving works like the Longmen Grottoes show the ambition of an empress who used architecture not just to house her court, but to build a new world with herself at its center. Number 2, what if you had to build a kingdom in your enemy's shadow? A queen inherited a kingdom that was being squeezed by 2 powerful and expanding neighbors. She spent her life fighting for her people's survival and independence. She was a master of guerrilla warfare and a shrewd diplomat. She also understood the importance of a secure capital, a place that could serve as a center of government, a military stronghold, and a symbol of her people's resilience. Her name was Ningambande, queen of the Ndongo and Matamba kingdoms in 17th century Angola. Her life was a long and relentless struggle against the Portuguese, who were trying to expand their colonial control and dominate the slave trade, and against rival African groups. For much of her early reign, Njinga was a nomadic warrior. She lived in military camps, constantly on the move, leading her army in raids against the Portuguese and their allies. She did not have a permanent capital, or the resources for grand building projects. Her focus was on survival and resistance. However, after conquering the kingdom of Matamba around 1631, she finally had a secure base of operations. Matamba was a state in the interior more difficult for the Portuguese to attack. Here, Njinga began to build a stable state. She established a new capital, also called Matamba, and set about turning it into a center of power. Her architectural work was, by necessity, focused on defense and functionality. The capital was fortified. She used a combination of natural features, like rivers and hills, and man-made structures to create a defensible settlement. The buildings would have been primarily made of local materials like wood, mud, and thatch, but the layout and organization of the capital reflected her military priorities. It was a place from which she could govern, train her army, and manage the trade networks that were vital to her kingdom's economy. Njinga was also an innovator in statecraft. She welcomed runaway slaves and Portuguese-trained African soldiers into her kingdom, swelling her army and her population. Her capital became a melting pot, a haven for those who resisted Portuguese rule. The settlement had to grow to accommodate these new arrivals. The construction of housing and infrastructure to support this growing population was a key part of her state-building project. She also built a new political and social structure. She famously created a court where gender roles were fluid, sometimes dressing as a man and keeping male consorts who dressed as women. Her court was the political and symbolic heart of her kingdom, and the physical space of the capital was the stage on which this unique culture was performed. Later in her life, after decades of warfare, Njinga negotiated a peace treaty with the Portuguese. As part of this new diplomatic relationship, she converted to Christianity for the second time and invited Catholic missionaries into her kingdom. This led to a new phase of building in her capital, the construction of a church. This was a significant political act. The church was a symbol of her new alliance and her status as a Christian monarch, which she hoped would give her legitimacy in the eyes of the Europeans and protect her kingdom. Njinga's building legacy is not one of stone monuments. It is the story of creating a capital city in the midst of a constant war for survival. She built a state, a society, and a physical center for her people's resistance. Her capital at Matamba was the tangible result of her incredible political and military skill. It was a fortress, a refuge, and the heart of a kingdom forged in the fire of anti-colonial struggle. Number 1, can you build your way to immortality? A queen, legendary for her beauty and wisdom, was said to have built one of the ancient wonders of the world. She supposedly constructed massive walls, bridges, and hanging gardens in the great city of Babylon. Her story was told and retold for centuries by Greek and Roman historians. But was she real? Her name is Semiramis. She is one of the most enigmatic figures in the history of royal builders. According to the Greek writer Diodorus Siculus, who based his account on earlier sources, Semiramis was a queen of Assyria who, after the death of her husband King Ninus, embarked on an extraordinary building campaign. The legend says she founded the city of Babylon. She had it enclosed with massive brick walls so wide that chariots could race on top of them. She built a bridge across the Euphrates River, which flowed through the city. Most famously, she is credited with creating the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, a terraced, man-made mountain of lush greenery built to please a homesick consort. Her supposed ambitions were not limited to Babylon. She was said to have built other cities, constructed roads across mountains, and erected monuments and obelisks. She also led armies, conquering vast territories from Egypt to India. She was the ultimate queen, a brilliant administrator, a great general, and a builder on a superhuman scale. For centuries, this was the story people knew. Semiramis was the great queen who built Babylon, but modern archaeology and the deciphering of cuneiform texts have revealed a different, more complex picture. The historical figure who likely inspired the legend of Semiramis was Shamaramat. She was a real Assyrian queen who lived in the late 9th century BC. She was the wife of King Shamshi Adad V. After his death, she served as regent for her young son, Adad Nirari III, for about 5 years. This was a period of political instability, and for a woman to hold such power in the male-dominated Assyrian Empire was highly unusual. Shamaramat appears to have been a powerful and effective ruler, stabilizing the empire for her son. A monument found at the city of Ashur mentions her, indicating her exceptional status. However, the historical Shamaramat was not the builder of Babylon. The great walls and palaces of Babylon that the Greeks marveled at were largely the work of King Nebuchadnezzar II, who ruled nearly 2 centuries after Shamramat. The Hanging Gardens, if they existed at all, were also attributed to him. So, how did the story of a real Assyrian regent get transformed into the legend of a mythical Babylonian superbuilder? The Greeks were fascinated by the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia, but their knowledge was often incomplete and secondhand. Over time, the stories of several powerful figures and great builders seem to have been combined and attributed to one memorable name, Semiramis. The fact that she was a woman who held real power likely made her a compelling figure around whom such legends could grow. The story of Semiramis is a powerful example of how history and myth can intertwine. The legend captures a fundamental truth that queens did rule, and that they were associated with some of the greatest architectural and engineering feats of the ancient world. Even if the real Shamramat did not build the Hanging Gardens, her story became the vehicle for preserving the memory of those incredible structures. The question of Semiramis as a builder is a question about storytelling itself. She may not have laid the bricks of Babylon, but in the legends built around her name, she became the architect of one of civilization's most potent urban myths. She is the ultimate queen builder, a figure whose architectural legacy is not made of stone or clay, but of story.